My name is Dr. Susko. I am the debate coach at Calvert Hall College HS in Baltimore. The elective we're going to be doing today is on debating new. All right. Now, this elective is going to cover two general main areas. So the first is going to be on the neg side. So when somebody breaks a new affirmative against us, what do we do before the tournament even starts? What do we do in the pre-round? And then what do we do in the actual debate when we are debating a new affirmative? And then the second part of this elective is going to be talking about from the AF side. Now, Ethan Greer is offering a whole reading new AFs elective. So we're not going to get into like how to read a new AF, the components of reading a new AF. That'll be covered in that elective. If you're not able to go to that, I'm sure that'll get posted to the YouTube channel as well. We're talking about from the AF side when we're reading our normal affirmative and then new AF arguments are broken against us, whether that's a new critique, new DA, et cetera, and we'll talk about partner responsibilities, what you all should be doing from that, et cetera. So we're gonna go through those two, and then we'll do a Q&A and then send you all to lunch. So, neg versus new affirmatives. Neg versus new affirmatives. So when you are debating, there are things that you can do before the tournament, and there are things that you can do just to kind of be generally aware of as you're debating a new affirmative. I'm going to talk about a couple examples. Please don't make fun of Lobo for these. All of these involve Lucas Lobo since I taught him. So some of these are things that he won. Some of these debates are he lost very badly. So as we're kind of talking through these examples, but here are some things that dictate what you can and can't go for when you are debating a new affirmative, okay? So when a team reads new against you, always, and this is, just a general tip in general, is check the judge paradigm. So judges like to pretend that they're tabula rasa, but the tab room account shows what teams pref them, where they vote, who they vote for. So you can get a general inclination. Are they voting? Are they only in critical debates? Are they only in clash of civ debates, policy VK? Are they only in policy v policy debates? Are they voting neg all the time? Are they voting AF all the time? And their opinions on various counterplans, T, et cetera. So always check the paradigm to see what are the range of options that I have. Are they a T judge? Are they a K judge? And then kind of what are my options from there? Generally speaking as well, when they disclose new in the tournament matters. So for example, this is not going to talk about it the first term of the year when everybody's like, it's new and you're like, whatever, because people are going to be breaking different camp AFs. But when we're in our 4th, 5th, 6th tournament in the season, when in the tournament they disclose matters. So for example, if they disclose a new AF in the elims is different than when they disclose in the prelims. So for example, if they disclose, if it's a preset tournament and you know your round 2 is neg and they disclose neg, say they disclose a new AF, one thing you can do that's different than being disclosed new AF in the elims is check their teammates. So for example, if you're debating a big squad, they say it's a new AF, most likely other teams are reading that same affirmative. So even though they say it's new, you can get a coach, you can get on the docs of the school's other debates and then see what the new AF is way in advance so that you can basically know what you're debating. Which is also why it's important to disclose as quickly as possible. So when you are debating somebody, you should always be getting to the room as quickly as possible, disclose so that you can utilize as much prep time as humanly possible. Sometimes we get an hour, sometimes we get a half an hour, but I'm sure we've all been in situations where the AF team shows up 10 minutes before, they say it's new or they disclose something, and you're like, I really wish you had showed up much earlier. So, pre-round. Let's look at the right-hand side the left-hand side we'll talk about a little bit earlier. So they say it's a new affirmative, okay? They say it's a new affirmative. Now, it depends on the squad, but it's never actually a new affirmative. Sometimes it structurally is. Don't get me wrong, they might be going for, they might start the season at jobs guarantee, and then they read a UBI affirmative. That certainly could happen. But a lot of times, teams that read new want to not reinvent the wheel in every component. So I'll get to that in a little bit in a second, but you want to gather a list of everything that squad has read, because a lot of times too, if they're reading new and they're, the 5th, the 7th team on a squad, it's new for them, but it's not new for the team, so they have to disclose to you, or you have a very strong argument with the judge on a disclosure theory argument, okay? So when they say it's new, you want to go through and say, all right, here are the, let's say MBA, for example, here are the 17 AFs that MBA has read. Is it one of those? And then you're just going down that list, because a lot of times teams are going to try and disclose improperly to give themselves an edge, which is, just an unfortunate thing that some AF teams do. So you can eliminate what they've read, or sometimes somebody will say it's new, but it's actually a new advantage. Or they'll disclose and they'll say it's a new advantage, but it really isn't. Another squad member read it on the wiki. So just through disclosure, you can get a ton of information on whether it's new, or new-ish. Another teammate read it. So the second thing in pre-round, they disclose new. Identify common themes that this squad has. Identify common themes that this squad has. So this squad they might only go for econ work. They might only go for a certain impact in years past. So a lot of times they might read something completely different, but think about it from your perspective, okay? If you're reading a new AF, that takes a ton of time. You have to have a whole new 2AC frontline file. You have to have new impact work. So if you're a 2A, you want to eliminate as much of the research burden, blocking burden as humanly possible. So a lot of 2As, what they'll do with their new AFs are they'll try and see if they can utilize some impact work from previous AFs. So you can have a general understanding of what topic area they're going to go for. Now, furthermore, going into the season, so this is before the tournament even starts, all right, you should have prepared 1NCs. Now, these prepared 1NCs should be something along the lines of somewhere between 7 to 10 off case, depending on if you're a big policy debater or just the general critique that you want to be going for in a topic area. So the first examples are more policy centered. So when people disclose new affirmatives, they'll read an affirmative for a specific advantage. So for example, something that teams love to do is they love to disclose and read a new courts AF, okay? Why might there be a benefit to reading a new courts AF? What's the benefit of reading a courts AF? Not rhetorical. Anyone?
You spike out of politics.
Spike out of politics, right? So you spike out of politics. Yes.
It's like good against the state's counterplan.
Good against the state's counterplan, right? And so you get out of federal level action that's related to the legislative branch. So politics DA, people are going to read politics DA, state's counterplan. So you are boxing people out of their core generic arguments so that there is a smaller list of negative arguments that they can go for. So a lot of times people read a courts AF and break a courts AF for that specific reason. So it's good to have, if it's a courts affirmative, what would my arguments be? So that's where you can have, if you're on the critical side, what are my critiques of the judicial branch? From a policy perspective, what are my courts DAs? Am I going to go for the court capital DA? Am I going to go for the Hollow Hope DA, a variety of different DAs that are related to the courts? Am I going to impact turn the court advantage that they're going for? So having that work specifically will help you out a lot. So I told you I was going to throw some examples. When you're going through this, okay, you want to make sure that you are thinking at the 2&R level. So if I debate a courts team, where do I specifically want to go? What does my 2&R want to look like? So it's not just having a bunch of arguments in a prepared 1NC. It's where am I at in terms of 2&R thinking, okay? So this is going to be the worst example, but Lobo, my debater who's in the, CAN lab? Yes? Yeah. He was at the TOC junior year. This was the criminal justice topic, and we were debating Northside DS, I believe. So they were like a top 10, top 15 team. We were relatively good as well. We had like 7 or 9 bids or something like that. So we break new. We read a new affirmative, and our affirmative was a domestic terrorism affirmative. And we had a terrorism advantage, obviously domestic terrorism affirmative. And then our second advantage that we read was related to executive flex bad. Executive flex bad. So we wanted to basically have a specific strategy and defend a specific branch, because on that topic, people would read the court's counterplan, people would read the exec counterplan. So we wanted to have an advantage that specifically went along those lines. So the team that we debated, they had their generic 1NC against executive affirmatives, and it included exec flex good. So they knew in any debate when they debated a executive affirmative what they were going to go for. So the 2NC 2&R was already mapped, which was the 2NC was going to be exec flex good, the affirmative was exec flex bad. We were not prepared. We did not have a practice debate on that. We were not as well blocked, and we had not had as many debates because that was a new affirmative. And we basically got mopped in that debate as a quick 0-1 to start the TOC. Okay? So having an idea of what you want to go for in these strategies, super, super useful. So having a prepared 1NC of, if it's a courts aff, here's what I want to read. If it's a Congress aff, here's what I want to read. You should also be mapping this out for different areas of the topic. So if it's jobs guarantee, what is my jobs guarantee for negative strategy? If it is Social Security, what is my Social Security strategy? That might be a counter plan that I would want to read. That might be a link strategy on the critique that I want to specifically read. And the same thing is true for critical affirmatives as well. So am I going to go the CAP VK route? Is there a specific area of my critical literature that applies better to policy affirmatives versus critical affirmatives versus different areas of the critical debate? To have that. And then lastly, have your kitchen sink prepared 1NC strategy, okay? So an important thing to know is in the conditionality war, conditionality good versus bad, in a new affirmative scenario, conditionality basically gets thrown out the window. So I would say in most debates, if conditionality bad is the 2AR and a new AF, the AF team is winning those conditionality debates very, very few times, okay? If you're reading a new affirmative, the floodgates of negative positions will basically be unleashed. So you are allowed to, if in a normal debate, you can get 2 to 3 conditional advocacies, sometimes you're able to get away with like 3 to 5. And that is just like a unfortunate aspect of reading new and something you should think about as you're reading new, okay? Now, as you're going pre-round, so this is all pre-round, we have not even gotten into the debate itself, okay? Things that you can be thinking about. So they disclose new, you have 30 minutes. Going to the third bullet point on the left, right? People disclose new to take the coach out of the room, right? The coach can't tell you a specific strategy, can't go along those lines. But if you're doing what I told you to do on the prepared 1NCs route, you can still have the coach in the room of what of my prepared 1NCs, of my kitchen sink strategy, would work for this judge for this strategy. So, for example, Lobo and his partner on the, what is this, water topic, okay? It's the Glenbrooks tournament, which is a big tournament in Chicago. We're like 4-5-1, 4-1. It's round 6. We debate MBAs, like second team. They break a new affirmative, okay? So break a new affirmative, they like jump into the Zoom, new affirmative, they leave, okay? So the affirmative ends up being this sustainable development goals affirmative that MBA read for like the remainder of the tournament, but we had no idea what they were going to be doing. So what we had was we had our kitchen sink 1NC strategy, and that's also where we had a new negative argument prepared. So we had an idea of if somebody's going to read something new, as opposed to waiting to break our new argument against a really, really good team, we have our what counter plan, what DA should we read against the new team. So we had a filibuster disadvantage that we had not broken. One reason because it was terrible, but the second reason is because it was a new argument that we were break glass in case of emergency. So we talked through what new argument am I going to read and to get them off their blocks. So when somebody is reading a new affirmative, they've had very, very few debates on that affirmative. And they have the debates that are the most logical against it and the whole reason why you would be breaking those new affirmatives. So getting them off their game is something that basically they don't have the blocks for. They don't have the benefits of having multiple 2ACs, right? So when you debate a team that doesn't break new the whole year, it's difficult because they've probably had 15 cap debates, 30 framework debates. If it's that Tuberville affirmative that somebody's reading, a bunch of T debates, okay? Like they're just gonna be living in T debates the entire season. So you can flip the script of getting them off of their blocks, which they don't have blocks to everything, by having a new argument to read, having a new counter plan to read, new disadvantage to read, etc. So you want to get them back on their heels because their 2AC blocks, unless that is their new affirmative they're going to read for the rest of the season, is always not going to be as good as their main 2AC file, So if you are obviously not going to be as prepared as the affirmative team, but you have to know that you need to put them on their heels to read positions that they're not going to be comfortable for and to be bold in your 1NC strategy. So this is pre-round stuff. General. So as we get into the in-round stuff, things to think about as you are reading negative arguments and you're debating a new AF. So you can have new arguments to read, but sometimes we don't have time to prep those new arguments. We don't have, unlike the AF, we don't have infinite neg prep. So maybe we don't have a new argument to read. We should be sticking to our strengths. So if you're a states counterplan person, you should be going through and trying your best to get through a states counterplan strategy, bearing that that's possible. Obviously, if it's courts AF, you wouldn't be able to do that, so you'd have to go through your court strategy. So just because it's new, you can stick to your strengths of what arguments you want to be reading. So it's the criminal justice topic. There's this tournament called the Bronx Tournament. It's like the biggest tournament in New York City. It's like in October. And we, on the criminal justice topic, we debated a GBS team, okay? So this GBS team, they read a tax crimes affirmative, and one of the advantages was specific to their mechanism, and then they read a big econ advantage, okay? on that topic, our team, we were a counterplan team, and then we just loved the DDEV, okay? So they made a terrible mistake when they broke an econ advantage to us, because we would DDEV people just to DDEV people on that topic. So that team didn't do a correct scouting report on Lobo and his partner, and we were able to be in a debate that we were just strong on. We had at least 5 to 10 DDEV debates, more if you include camp DDEV debates. Our files were updated, our cards were updated, so the strategy of them breaking new really didn't get them anywhere, and it was an easy neg victory because they were not prepared for a DDEV debate on that specific affirmative. All right? When people are breaking new, they've maybe had 2 to 3 practice debates on it, if that. Okay? So being bold and sticking to your arguments helps a lot. Like I was saying, having new arguments prepared can help you a lot. And then now let's go into the round itself. Okay? Into the round itself. So these are, it depends on where you're at in the season, but these are just kind of some global truths as you're debating new affirmatives, which is this. Utilize the wiki. Utilize the wiki when you're debating new. It might be a new affirmative for that specific team, but chances are, in very few instances, is it new for the topic. So this doesn't help you a ton for like the first couple tournaments in September, although most teams read camp affirmatives. But as we're going into October, November, December, chances are, if they're breaking something, it's affirmative that another team read, or it's an affirmative that there have been other debates on. So you should be looking at docs and seeing, what did this other team do? Did this other team have a strategy? Now that can be grabbing case cards, that can be, what did this other team do? Did they win or lose that debate? And then what can I throw into that 1NC? So as you're going into the 1AC, the 1AC is being read, you should be looking at the wiki, seeing what other teams have read this. Now, you can do this through one of 2 ways. You can try and Google their mechanism, and not Google their mechanism, throw their mechanism in the search bar, but also looking at teams that are going to the same tournaments you're all going to, checking the wiki often, and knowing the structure of it helps out a lot. So a lot of times you can be like, oh, this is a new affirmative, but I know that this Glenbrook's team has read this. This team from California has read this. So that it's something that you've at least looked at. That is a huge benefit that is free for everybody, whether it's a small school or a large school, is all of you have the same amount of access to the wiki. So if you are constantly looking at that, so you get bored between whatever your phone game is, so I think it's Cookie Clicker for my lab is like the thing that like all of them are really into. Checking the wiki in between Cookie Clicker games when you're bored at school allows you to kind of know, all right, these are what X, Y, and Z teams have read in my area. This is what X, Y, and Z teams have read at a big tournament, across the country that I'm not used to. So you can apply that work very, very quickly. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel with your 1NC. Now, in-round responsibilities, okay? So they are reading new, what you should be doing in the debate. This is dependent on your partner dynamic, all right? So some people have a partnership where the 2N makes the 1NC, the 2N does literally everything, and the 1N's job is just to sit in the corner and then read the politics DA, or sit in the corner and extend a counter plan. So some people have, depends on how you treat your 1Ns. 1Ns, you should speak up more for yourselves, okay? You exist, you matter, all right? I know the 2Ns don't really treat you that way, but you don't have to be in an abusive relationship. So this is some dynamic that you can talk through of what you want to do with your partner. So for example, when I would debate new affirmatives with my partner, when I debated in college, there would be somebody responsible for grabbing files and then a person responsible for looking at the 1AC itself. So I would not look at the 1A, I was the 1N, so that's why I'm also having some PTSD of that situation. So I would be the one grabbing our off-case positions, grabbing our impact defense, and then my partner would be looking at the evidence to see, all right, can we get this counter plan? Do we have a solvency advocate for this counter plan? Does our DA work for this? What is their trick? And then where can we go from there? So having responsibilities that go into the 1AC itself, because that way, one of the huge benefits of reading a new AF is you want to drain as much 1NC neg prep as possible, right? You want to break new and make them have to spend 2 minutes, 4 minutes, 5 minutes of 1NC prep, in which case you have such a huge benefit in terms of prep time in the rebuttals, where you have a lot of prep time in the rebuttals, they do not, which means your 2AR is going to sound a lot better than the 2NR just because of the prep time differential. So there's a couple strategies people can do. There's the strategy of just like waiving cross-X and using it as prep. That is a terrible idea, okay? Waiving cross-X and just using cross-X as 3 minutes of prep is a terrible idea. Why might that be a bad idea? Would anybody like to wager a guess? Why might it be bad to just waive the cross-X and both of you just use it to do that? Yes?
Especially with a new app, it's important to ask questions to try and understand what their trick is, because ideally when you know what the app is, you know the kind of tricks they're going to pull to get out of certain negative arguments.
Yeah, 100%. Haven, yes? Yeah.
You won't know much about how the mechanism works, or you won't know like the weakness of their arguments, and it will be hard to win offense against their app.
Okay, and Ryan, last point.
Waving cross is just a terrible look, perceptually, sort of, especially when they're asking you questions in cross and you're waving your first cross. You're just sort of at a lower position starting off.
Yeah, so can affect ethos for sure, can affect speaker points for sure, and then Annabeth, is it? Annabeth and Haven also correct in terms of the content. But we also want to think of not just ourselves, but the judge as well, okay? So cross-X is the only time in a debate where there's a direct contestation, right? You can confront your opponent, and then they have to provide an answer. Now, they can provide a terrible answer, they can say, I'm not going to answer that question, but you have it on the record, it's a direct response, and you're not speaking at a Mach 5 pace, so you can kind of get a big moment for there. So for the judge, super, super important to get context on it, because for the judge too, when they're judging a new affirmative, the quality of the judge changes, okay? So when you get a judge in October or November and they're reading, let's say it's the carbon AF, the carbon dividend AF, okay? My guess is that carbon dividend AF, judges will judge a ton, all right? Maybe they'll have 5, 10 debates on it. So they will know what the general tricks are. They'll have seen the general advantages. They'll have seen the general strategy. So they'll know what to expect, and they'll be looking at the debate more efficiently than somebody that has seen an affirmative for the first time. So the reason that helps is the judge doesn't have the luxury of empirics. They don't have the luxury of, oh, I've seen this debate, this is how it's played out in the back of my head. So they are a blank canvas for you to change how they look at a card, change how they look at a scenario, change how they look at the off-case positions. So cross-X is extremely, extremely important to establish your offense, okay? To establish your offense. Now that also means, and I believe Asia and BK are gonna get deeper into the cross-X strategies and their electives, and that'll obviously be posted online. But your cross-X has to be strategic, right? So this is where that pre-round prep comes in before the tournament. Here's my 1NC against courts. Here's my 1NC against jobs guarantee. Here's my 1NC against Social Security. So having a general idea of where you want to go before the debate will then dictate where you should be going. So for example, structurally, all right, we have the state's counter plan. There will be, people read politics. Hopefully it's better than the Farm Bill. But right now, them's the breaks, okay? So super strategic, right? You don't have to win a big risk of the politics DA if you win a massive solvency argument and are able to beat back the solvency deficits on the state's counterplan. So that being the case, if you're a state's team and you know that, as opposed to looking at the entire 1AC as it's going, all right, when they get to the solvency evidence, you should be looking at their Fed key warrants, their uniformity key warrants, their certainty key warrants to see where are their deficits. What deficits are going to matter? So for example, if your thing is to read a process counterplan and the main deficit to that is certainty and is a delayed deficit, one thing you want to do then is, one, look at the deficit itself, start asking cross-ex questions, and then start asking time frame questions on the advantages, okay? So why might you ask time frame questions on the advantages if you are a team that goes for process counterplans? Why is it important to ask advantage answers? Yes, Panav?
Yeah.
Panav.
It tests their delay certainty key warrants.
Yeah, and here's the thing too, is it not just tests those arguments too, but you're able to start the 2AR, 2NR impact calculus in the 1AC cross-ex. So if they say there's a deficit, a delayed deficit, and they're not able to contextualize it between months, days, years, right? If they can't tell you when the impact is going to happen, that allows you to get to your delayed deficit and be like, they can't contextualize when these impacts are going to occur. So obviously the counterplan would solve for these deficits, and we have a risk of our internal net benefit for our process counterplan. Okay? So based on what you want to go for before the debate matters. That questioning for the advantage does not matter for states, because the state's counterplan would operate at the same time frame as the federal government. So that doesn't really get you anywhere, which means that you should be looking at the questions based on what arguments you want to specifically go for. Hopefully that makes some sense. Okay, so cross-ex should be posted along those lines. 1N, 2N responsibilities we already talked about, so that can be something where you can determine who is going to do a wiki search, who is going to be the person that compiles and puts the 1NC together, who's going to be the one looking at the 1NC itself, the 1AC itself. So those are responsibilities you can kind of dictate. And then neg block wise, those are things that you've also talked about before the round starts. If it's these scenarios, what does the 1N go for? What does the 2N go for? Okay? And a lot of times you want to, if you have a 1N that's going for the same argument all the time, so I had a K team last year, and the 1N literally went for, we were like a very obnoxious K team, so we would like do 5, 6 off. And basically, my 1N would do the case debate, and then whatever trolley thing that like they barely answered, it would just pretend like it was a thing to like freak out the 1A, and that happened over and over and over again. So in a world of the new, debating new, you want to throw more responsibility to the 1N, because the 1N has more time to figure out what the trick is and to try and course correct, because they have the 2NC, they have the 2NC cross-ex, they have the 2AC cross-ex to kind of get their thoughts together. So the most important position in the debate for the neg typically should be the 1N anyway, because the 1N has the ability to bury the debate. But more importantly should be something to save the debate, because they have the most time to rectify problems, look at evidence, cut cards, find cards from there. Okay? So that's what you should do in round. Prep time, okay? So I've already talked about not using cross-ex as prep time, but one thing you should be doing, it's okay to take like maybe 15, 30 seconds of prep before the 1AC cross-ex, so you can have your marching orders to your 1N, what the 1N should be doing, okay? A lot of people do this in 2NC cross-X's now, is they'll take a little bit of prep in order to, tell the one end if they made a mistake or if they undercovered. Same kind of concept works when debating news. So it's okay to take 15, 30 seconds of prep before the cross-X so that the one end knows what they're doing, where to go. Completely fine to take as much prep as you need for the 1NC because if the 1NC is falls behind, it's really, really difficult for the neg to reinvent the wheel, which the neg can certainly do that, okay? The debate is not, unlike the 2AC, the debate's not completely over. If you screw up a lot in the 1NC, you can kind of make some changes based on the 2NC. I'm not saying read new positions, but if the 1NC was very light on a position, you can expand on it, go for it for 8 minutes, what have you, okay? So questions about when we're neg debating new affirmatives, if there's been a specific scenario or if there's something that first before we get into this, raise your hand if somebody's ever broken a new affirmative against you. Okay, so quite a few, okay. Let's get it, we'll get into the Q&A at the end. So let's switch over to F and then we'll do some questions, okay? So again, this lecture is not talking about breaking a new affirmative. Ethan will be covering that. There's a lecture or two on the DDI YouTube page. You should definitely check that out. A lot of great content from a lot of different instructors. And then Ethan's going to be covering that in an elective. Okay? So you may have noticed a theme for what I'm talking about, which is utilizing your pre-round prep is really, really important when you're AF and really, really important when you're neg, okay? So when you're affirmative, you're debating somebody, obviously they're not going to disclose what they're reading, right? They'll disclose past 2 and R's. Some people have more detailed wikis than others, but you can kind of see where their general leaning is, right? So if they're a team that just goes for impact turns, the entire, all of their 2 and R's are impact turns, you can pretty much guarantee that they're going to go for impact turns. If they're going for different counterplans on their wiki, chances are they might be breaking a new counterplan against you if they're going to be breaking something new. So doing the scouting and identifying their strategy before the debate allows you to utilize your coach better, allows you to utilize your 1A better, okay? So who are the 2As here? Just raise your hand, a couple 2As, okay? Now, 1As are the worst, okay? They kind of sit there and they're like, what should we do? We have nothing to do. And it's like you always have stuff to do, 1As, okay? You can do 1AR blocks. You can, I don't know, write a 2AC block, cut a card, right? So you want to be utilizing your time, no offense, 1As. You want to be utilizing your time of where should I send my partner and what should that be? So one of the best ways to do that is 2 and R strategy. What are they, what do we think they're going to do? And then kind of go along those lines, okay? So are they reading a new counter plan? Do spot research, do a wiki grab, and what does my judge want, right? Some judges in K debates go for the perm. Some judges want the impact debates. So instead of you going for the perm link defense strategy, they would rather you just do an impact turn debate and win a framework debate. So, you can kind of look at that based on their judging record and based on their philosophies. So also you can align your 2AC 1AR blocks of, okay, what is my 1AR extension for my delay deficit? What's my 1AR 2AC extension to my state's Fed key warrant, okay? So doing these things before the debate allows you to apply specific areas. So for example, say they read a process counterplan that you do not have answers to. Because it's a process counterplan by definition, that means your certainty and delay deficits can apply. So if you don't know what counterplan they're going to read, you at least know the general area of what deficits you can have and the strength of those deficits. So these are things that you can do in the pre-round. Now, let's go to in-round responsibilities, okay? Now, I am guilty of this. All 1As are guilty of this. So 1A is shame on you. When somebody reads new, and I know all of you have done this, so you don't have to lie. When somebody reads a new argument, you, I'm sure, have stared at your partner and been like, where are the answers? Find the answers. What are you doing? There was one time, and this is just me being a bad partner, my partner in college, we were pretty young. This team read a new argument against us, and as opposed to me helping, I just stared at him for like 7 minutes, and I called him Preposaurus Rex. And like I mean, we had a very bad partner dynamic in that respect. And I was like, I'm not going to help you. I'm like, this argument's very easy. Why aren't you finding cards on this? Where are our blocks? And I was utterly worthless to my partner, and we just wasted like 7 minutes of prep for me just being a bad human being to my partner. I thought it was hilarious at the time. Preposaurus Rex, all-time joke, but was not a good thing in terms of a partnership. So when somebody reads new, whether it's a new DA, new counterplan, new critique, you should divvy out partner responsibilities, okay? So that could be, see if this is something on the wiki that people have answers to. That's going to the citation and seeing if this card actually says what it says. Reading the card itself. If you go to the citation, maybe the AF answer is literally the next paragraph, or it's, there's those teams that like shrink the text to like 4% or to 4, and they're like, oh, there's all the AF answers, right? So have somebody that's responsible for doing one of those two things. For me, and this is just something that I would do as a debater, I was the 1A, so I was the reader. So my partner would be grabbing the blocks, and I would be reading the evidence. I would say, pull this block. This deficit doesn't apply. So that you are basically utilizing your time, because if both of you are reading the evidence, that means one of you is not grabbing blocks, one of you is not using that prep time efficiently, okay? So if it's a new DA, and obviously, you should take, we'll get into prep time in a minute. So if it's a new disadvantage, okay, here's what you do. So how many of you have had a new politics DA broken against you? Okay, a few people, right? So if it's a new disadvantage, you should be looking at the quality of their evidence first, because a lot of times with disadvantages, there aren't a lot in this topic. So the new one is probably really, there's probably a reason people aren't reading it, is because it's probably has some strategic flaw. So you want to go to that specifically, as opposed to, a lot of times somebody will cross-ex on the impact work, which everybody has impact defense, so is utterly worthless. So you want to be looking at the uniqueness level. Does this uniqueness make any sense? Go to the card very specifically and see if you can find analytics to just take it out. A lot of DAs, specifically politics DAs, can be taken out with an analytic, can be taken out with a structural argument, because there's a lot of components that need to go into a politics DA. If you're going to cut cards, then, Caroline, could you get the door, please? If you're going to cut cards, they should be at the uniqueness and link level, okay? And you should be answering every component of the DA and potentially having offense if you have the ability to. Because a lot of times, you're not going to have a link turn strategy, you're not going to have an offensive strategy. So if the DA is a net benefit to the counter plan, you're in a really bad spot, because all they have to do, if they're going to win some form of states, you have to make sure you have offense on politics, otherwise you have to make the DA go to 0. Counter plans. So if it's a new counter plan, cardinal sin of a 1A is not looking at the counterplan text. A lot of times, people will write the counterplan text incorrectly, and you can win the debate just from there. Like, you misspelled a word, you didn't add this component of our affirmative, so you can get go from there. Cross-X's should also be focused on new counterplans so that you have an idea of what the hell it is. And then as you go through that, so you're reading the evidence, you are cross-Xing on them, then it becomes clear what your deficits are. Now, if it looks clear that there are no deficits, chances are the counterplan's not competitive. So you have an idea that you want to be going for a permutation in that world. And that also will dictate our strategy, because sometimes there are counterplans that are not competitive. We can't answer everything perfectly, so there's a very clear-cut strategy of where we want to go. It's not a deficit, it's this counterplan should not exist, or maybe it's a theory argument that you're comfortable going with. Okay? New critiques. So this is something that a lot of teams struggle with, okay? And that's because K-debaters love chaos, and they love to throw things out there that make people think you're going to go one way and then you're going to go another. So for example, like I said, my top team this past year was a K team. Cannot tell you the amount of times where we went for a K that was an AfroPass, and we said, let's throw a 30-second AfroPass card so they think it's the AfroPass K, and then they just read a bunch of AfroPass answers, and we're like, oh yeah, we're not that. And then we go for the actual critique itself. So that is just like something that K-debaters do that it's just like super, super frustrating, but it's something that you kind of, as you're debating, you want to outline where the links are and then what the alternative and impact is, okay? You may not know what the alt says. You may not know, like you've never seen a card before that is on a specific critique, but dedicating a cross-X to the link level, for example. So say your affirmative is like a soft left affirmative. Going back to pre-round, you know, based off of what your affirmative says, what you're going for, right? So say you're that Tuberville AF, which is just like a military primacy AF, you're not going for permutations, okay? You're going for hedge is good, military primacy is good, you're going for the impact turn level, right? Which means that you should be looking at a critique from that lens. So you're not trying to take out every single link. You are looking at the framing of it, and is this a floating alt, so is this a floating pick that can somehow fiat their way through all of my offense and then just end the debate right there. So you want to know what the strengths of your affirmative are and then base it from that position. And then spend cross-X's on the alternative, going through what the alternative does, the framing of the critique, what the framing argument does. But all of those are predicated on knowing what your general strategy is against the critique before round based on the quality and the structure of the affirmative that you're reading. Okay? So those are the general things in terms of reading new affirmatives. We're now going to move into the Q&A, and then we'll go to lunch. So I'm going to hit stop recording on both of these. Got that.